Yeah,
You know,
I'm glad that Galance, took you on, and Gillian, made well, got you where you are. I mean, you obviously got a lot of credit for her.
Yeah, I'm very, very, very lucky, and it was amazing that she just started really at Galance when that happened, and so we've sort of come up together in a sense, and it's great that we still work together very effectively. And she's a brilliant editor, both creatively and creatively working on the book, but much more importantly in a way that I don't think necessarily everyone realises how important an editor is, sort of behind the scenes and in terms of guiding the publishing of the book and trying to pull resources out of the publisher to focus on your book and planning campaigns in the way that she's very, very good at the corporate side of it as well, which is in a way you need almost more than the creative stuff, because I can edit a book but I can't sit in a publishing meeting. So she's a huge asset. Yeah.
And does she, obviously having that good relationship with her and the team at Gallant, if you've got a deadline, you obviously might be given a bit of leeway when it comes to going past that deadline. Do you sort of, use that quite a lot, that friendship, saying, oh, well, I've got a deadline for this, but, we've been together. Do you sort of say, can I have another 2 weeks or 2 months?
Yeah, well, I mean, the weird thing is we've not, there were deadlines with, there were kind of deadlines with Best Served Cold, for example, which I then missed by a couple of months, and we had to move the date back. I found that book a real struggle to write. That was the one I found hardest.
Okay.
Because it was sort of going from those familiar characters and the familiar plot with the 3 books to suddenly starting something new. And I expected to be faster and faster, but suddenly with new characters, new settings, it was just like typing with mittens on all of a sudden. I had no idea what to do. So that was really difficult to do. But with these latest books, I mean, there weren't really deadlines in that sense, because the plan was always, look, I'll write a first draft. And once I've got a full first draft, we'll see where we are, really, and then plan and publish them at that point. That was kind of always the plan. And Gillian and Orion generally, they just supported that entirely. And I think, they're used to being in that position of knocking on people's door, waiting for the next book. Yeah. And it can become it can become unpleasant for the writer, but it can become kind of unpleasant for the publisher in a way, to have to always be rushing to stick the next thing out of whoever's front list, get the next book out. And so I think in a way they perhaps appreciated the concept of trying to get 3 books ready so they could then publish them in the way that worked for them. And it meant a gap and a wait, which is a bit of a risk and a bit of a worry. But I think well worth it in the long run, both for readers and from our point of view. I think for everyone, hopefully it will work better to be able to just put the books out and not leave people waiting a long time in between installments, At the same time, you don't want to publish too fast. Like a year, we kind of judged in the end that a year apart was about as close together as the market will really stand before people get totally bored of hearing about you.
How do you go about writing a book then? Is it something you sort of lock yourself away? Is that the office? Is that the place where you write, where you are now?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, at the moment. Okay. And there's nothing particularly magical or exciting about it in a way, I try and be as workmanlike as I can. I try and avoid any magical thinking about writing, because, if you can't work without your lucky pen, then when your lucky pen breaks, suddenly you're in a pickle. And it's bad enough. You'll always have days where things don't really come together, or days where you don't make a lot of headway. So you need to just treat it like work. Yeah. That's my feeling. You wouldn't accept a plasterer saying, I don't feel like it today. Sorry, mate. I'll come back in a few days and I'll try that wall then. But I can't make any promises. You wouldn't have that. And I think likewise, you will have times where you can't produce as a writer, but it's kind of, the more you can treat it as bricklaying, as straightforward work that just needs to be got through, the better. And so, I treat a first draft, I just kind of start smashing away at it, and I'm quite structured. I plan. I think I have when I start a book, I have a period where I'm just writing notes longhand, just thinking about what I'll do, who the characters might be, what the settings and the various action of different parts of it will be. And then I just break it down into smaller and smaller pieces. So in terms of this trilogy, I thought of each book as 3 parts. I thought, what's the basic fundamental action of each part, and what's each character then doing within that? And then when I came to write each one, break it down into chapters, what point of view is each chapter going to be from, balancing up the kind of different plot lines and the exposure of the different characters and the way they interrelate, and trying to get a pace and a sense of flow in terms of each part building up to something, you know, and an ebb and flow, like waves up a beach, if I can manage that. And so you're thinking about all those concerns, but then you break it into scenes. And then once you know what each scene's going to be, to start writing them, you know, and then you bash through a draft, really. And then when I read, the way I've kind of ended up working now is that I'll write a draft of a part. So I'll plan a part, I'll draft it, and then I'll revise it myself. And having done that, I've got a pretty good idea what's working, what's maybe not working so well, what might need to change. And then I'll send it to Gillian. So she reads each part as I do it. And then she'll make some comments, you know, we'll meet up and we'll talk it over for an hour or two. She'll have some ideas about what's working, what's not working so well.
Okay.
Chime with me anyway. And that gives me a slightly different ideas about what the next part might need to be, what might need to change with that. So then I plan that part, and then I draft that part, revise it, send it to Gillian, we talk about it, and then third part. And then, of course, you've got a book. But in the case of this, that was 9 times, you know, until you had the entire thing. And often the first part, there's a lot to talk about. You know, there's a lot to think about, how to change characters and what new scenes there might need to be. By the time you reach the end of that first book, hopefully you've kind of got a good idea now what the characters need to be, how it's going to work. And so with these books, I went back and revised that first book en masse.
Okay.
Because then I had a pretty good idea where I was going. And then I drafted the second book, and then I drafted the third. And once I got to the end of that, then there was a kind of big stock-taking moment of, okay, what do we need to change in the first book? How do we need to redo things and alter things? And then tighten the first book right up with a much revised and cut and edited second draft. And that's when I've kind of got a book that makes sense, where the names are all consistent and the pace feels right. And so that was basically how this one worked, part by part.
Okay. From what you've just said then, any budding writers out there who want advice, that's probably the best advice. Even though you're talking about how you structured your books, you know, that's the best advice they probably get. You know, they go sort of plan each individual thing, and then obviously I'll take the arc and how the characters develop and all the rest. So people will, I mean, you know,
I think also that's just what has emerged as my kind of process, and partly just for this project. I mean, for different books, you tend to maybe work in a slightly different way.
Okay.
Like sometimes I've worked out of order, and I'll have written one plot line consecutively, and then another plot line, and then shuffled them up. That just felt like the right way to do it.
Okay.
And sometimes I've just written in order. So it's just about the projects and what works for you. And different people have very different approaches that work for them. So you never want to be prescriptive about it. But I suppose that you know, the principle of breaking everything down into small bits. I mean, the idea of writing a book seems horrifying.
Yeah.
But anyone can write a paragraph.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a book's just a load of paragraphs.
Yeah. That's true.
That's true. They've got to be in the right place. But the other thing you realise over time is, you know, if you write a load of shit one day, which does happen, then you can always cut it and change it and redo it the next day, and you'll find there are maybe some nice bits in there, some nice ideas, some paragraphs, some nice turns of phrase. So you can just throw most of it away and keep what's good. And in the end, you'll have a load of good stuff. That's the hope, anyway.
I like your the book is just a lot of paragraphs. I'm going to use that. That's bang on. That is. I like that.
It helps to think of it that way sometimes, because you can get hits of, oh my god, you know, it's a bit like climbing a mountain. When you look at it from a distance, Christ, am I ever going to get up there? But one step after another, and you'll get there.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. One step at a time, isn't it? As your style, I mean, rephrase. How has your style of writing changed then through the last 15? Well, let's say 20 years, because obviously you wrote the first one, like you said, about 20 odd years ago when it started.
I think 2001 was when I started. Do you know what? I don't think it has changed that much.
Okay.
I think the approach really from quite early on, which was largely instinctive. It wasn't really something that I thought massively like, what will my style be? It was just the way that seemed natural to me to write, which is very tight third person point of view writing in a way.
Yeah.
So it's in the head, always in the head and through the eyes of a character, though it may be alternating different characters. And really just to kind of give as much sense of that person and that person's thought process and their voice and their way of thinking about the world as I possibly can within the way that it's written, and to change the style of writing really according to the person whose point of view I'm writing from. That was there right at the start, and it's kind of still more or less what I do. And I don't think that's much changed. You know, I've got a bit better at it. I think I've got quicker.
Okay.
You know, I achieved when I first started, I would go over and over and over things, and I'd revise every paragraph when I finished it, and then every 3 paragraphs together when I finished those, and every chapter when I finished it. And every day I'd start by revising what I'd written yesterday, you know, experimenting really.
Meticulous though, you sound like you're meticulous.
Yeah, I think I am pretty meticulous, I think probably. Or at least I feel like good results derive from a lot of revising and going over things for me. But I'm much more efficient now. You know, I tend to smash through a first draft a bit more quickly and then go over and revise en masse, if you like, rather than going over and over things. So I get a decent result much more quickly than I used to. And, you know, I've sort of picked up a few tricks and approaches that work very well for me. You know, often things like linking together chains of incidental points of view that aren't necessarily part of the main storyline. You know, that's always worked well for me. So I've kind of got better and more conscious of what I'm doing and of how the whole thing works.
Yeah.
I think I'm better at plotting and at pacing than I was. But at the same time, I feel like fundamentally the approach is much the same.
Do you ever feel like deviating to a different genre, you know, even maybe under a pseudonym? Because like you said, you style, you know, your style now. But have you ever thought about, well, not that I know of, I don't know you've written any other books under a pseudonym, but not that, you know, I'd probably be proven wrong by comments, but I don't know that you have, and you probably have. I don't think you have anyway. But no. Have you ever thought about, is that something you want to toy with at some point?
I mean, as with the prequels, never say never, but it's not something that necessarily, you know, I'm not someone who has big trunks full of half-finished books and loads of ideas of things that are desperately waiting to be developed. I'm kind of a one book at a time guy, and I tend to be more, right, I need to write a book, what's it going to be, than I have these 15 ideas, which shall I develop? So I don't necessarily feel like, I've got this romance idea that'd be wonderful, and this historical fiction idea that would be brilliant, and this science fiction book that's waiting to go. And there is a sort of, I mean, taking a dully kind of business-like attitude, it's difficult to move out of the genre you're successful in.
Yeah.
You know, once you've had a certain amount of success, you get used to selling a certain level, and it's difficult to go back to saying, right, my next book, I'm going to sell a quarter as many books.
Yeah.
That's a tough choice to make. Not because of money necessarily, though, I mean, that is an aspect, but more just because, you know, selling books and getting readers is an important metric of your success, however you look at it. Yeah. And publishers will always want from you what worked last time. You know, they'll want to hit the same audience first before they look for new readers. And so there's a kind of inertia, you know, to doing something relatively similar to what you've already done, which makes it quite difficult to move to somewhere totally different. And fantasy is a big playground, you know, you can do all kinds of things in it. In a way, I've written a very classic epic fantasy trilogy with the first law, very self-consciously, a sort of take on Lord of the Rings and similar books. And then I wrote a kind of gangster revenge story and a war story and a Western in that fantasy setting. So
right, okay,
you could do those things. You know, if I felt the need to write a noir, my first thought would be, okay, it's a used up inquisitor come back for one last investigation in the Union. You know, you can do that in that setting without necessarily having to set it in 50s LA or whatever it might be. So I think, you know, fantasy is a broad enough genre that I can do pretty much anything I'd want to do within it. But certainly, you know, I've obviously written those fantasy books that are in a different world than the first law.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't rule out trying different stuff in different worlds. In fact, the next book I write will probably be in a different world again. But I'll probably come back to the first law off and on because it's kind of my first love in a way. It's nice to try.
And it's your world as well, you know, it's what's in your head, you know, you created it and you've got enough of a fan base and readership that, you know, love what you do in your writing. So,
fingers crossed, you never know. We all have a downfall sooner or later, don't we? The sales tend to either be going up or they're going down. So it's like, hopefully we'll start through for a while.
You'll be all right.
Yeah, I think I'm not really a world guy so much. You know, some fantasy writers write very vivid, very strange, very alien worlds, and often they've got a point to make with the kind of world they're writing that is intrinsic to the story. And so different stories that cook up a very different world. And that's not really what I do so much. I tend to, you know, use a fantasy world really as an analog for ours. And it's more about the things that all literature have in common, the drama, the characters and the dialogue and the action and those things. So I kind of feel like in a way it would just be smashing up the sets to build some more sets, which doesn't feel you know, there's that much point to it.
Yeah, I understand. And do you read, it's not like a random question, but do you sort of read, I know you'll get sent loads of books to review, you know, or pass comments. I know Grant will probably send you hundreds of books a year and all the other publishers as well, not just all linked to Orion. Do you read any other genres, or was it always sort of fantasy, you know, even maybe in sci-fi books that you sort of read on a personal level? Or do you sort of, I know you cut some of your comments in here, and then you got Nietzsche, you know, obviously, you know, I know his work from all along when I was a kid. But do you sort of read the vast, you know, amount of, well, all across the genres and different books, old books, new books, you know, as a personal level?
Well, I hardly read any fantasy. The publisher's largely given up sending me stuff.
Really?
They occasionally do in a vain hope, but I don't really read any these days, or very little.
Okay.
I just find it hard to, it's too close to what I do. It's a busman's holiday, you know, and I find it both hard to enjoy because I'm too editorial in my thinking. I read it like I'd read my own stuff, constantly going, oh, I'd change, that paragraph needs to be there, that line needs to be there. I wouldn't use that simile, I wouldn't use that adjective, you know. So I find it hard to turn off the analytic part of my brain when I'm reading it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I find it kind of creeps into my own writing too much.
Okay.
You know, it influences my own writing. And that's a bit of a problem with fiction generally. Like, you know, if I read Cormac McCarthy, I end up writing like a crap Cormac McCarthy for the time when I'm reading it. So that's tough to do. I mean, what I do tend to read mostly, and I don't read a lot actually. I'm not a fast reader, and I used to read voraciously, but much less so these days. I think it just uses the same muscle in a way as the writing and reviewing that I'm doing all day. So the last thing you want to do, you know, when you sit down after a day's writing is read someone else's book generally. But what I'll mostly read is non-fiction, somehow related to what I'm working on, or fiction that's of a different genre and is related to what I'm working on. So, you know, for Red Country, which is kind of a Western, I read a load of Westerns and a load of non-fiction, you know, the American West. And when I wrote these books, I read a lot of, you know, classics of the industrial era, kind of North and South, and The Gods Must Have Blood, a book about the Industrial Revolution, but the French Revolution, I should say.
Yeah, French, yeah.
That was written around the turn of the century, and that kind of stuff. And then also a lot of non-fiction about Industrial Revolution, the French Revolution, that helps to give you some kind of authentic texture to what you're doing. Frederick Engels' Condition of the Working Class in Britain.
Right, okay.
So it's that kind of thing I tend to read.
Yeah. I know that. I know that work. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because he was a friend. Was he a friend of Nietzsche? Was that right?
He was a friend of Marx.
Karl Marx.
So,
that's it.
Marx were sort of developing early communist theory, partly based on the condition of the proletariat.
The Communist Manifesto, wasn't that? Was what sprouted. Then, I remember now.
Yeah.
Because I'm Karl Marx, and obviously Karl Marx. I've got his book over there.
There's a similarity there, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, I lived in Germany. I know. I lived in Germany for 2 years, and people would say to me, you know, what's your name? And I'd say Karl Marsh, and they'd look at me strange, thinking, is he taking the piss? Karl Marsh. But yeah, no. So how's probably one last question, one sort of last thing, because I know you obviously want to get some tea or something. How's lockdown been for you then as a writer? You know, has it been more? I mean, I think you mentioned before on the email we emailed last week. You said it's no different for you. You're stuck home on a computer writing away. Obviously, the liberties of going out and about are restricted. But how's it been for you? Has it allowed you to be more? I can't think of the word. More. I can't think. Aware, not aware, but in your head, you know, you've allowed to escape, and then have more storylines come into your head because you're stuck at home. You can't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's been kind of mixed. But initially, funnily enough, it was great. It was really good initially because the kids were all at home, and so we had to give them a kind of structure to their day, so they get some schoolwork done and make some progress, and not just sit on the Xbox all day or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So, we structured the day based around my daughter's school day.
Yeah.
And I just broke it up into work periods for me and an hour of chores where I'd kind of fix a doorknob or something that had been hanging around for years.
Yeah.
And I just got masses done. I was twice as productive as I had been, previously. And I was working really, really well and feeling pretty good, and generally speaking, I'm obviously working at home and reasonably insular and used to working on my own in that way and being kind of self-motivated. So it wasn't a huge problem in that way. Obviously, it was kind of strange and kind of worrying. But then we'd been living through kind of quite strange, worrying, weird times for a while before that anyway, it felt like.
Yeah.
Ever since the Brexit referendum, even a little bit before that, things had felt quite broken up and wild and sort of quite distracting. I was listening to the news too much and sort of getting distracted by things, and the daily drama of that process somehow seemed quite a distraction.
Yeah, it's like anything to upset the status quo, wasn't it? Sorry, but
yeah, absolutely. It felt like a disrupted, weird sort of time for sure, and an exciting time in some ways, but also a sort of worrying time and just a weird time generally. So I had this routine down for a while, but then the wheels started to come off that wagon a little bit over time, and it's still going okay. But I think because I've been in this period of revision, of revising what I'd already written, that in a way I can do on a train, I can do in a hotel room, I can almost do walking from A to B, that's work I find quite easy to dip in and out of. If I'd been writing a first draft where you sort of need to really have your head in the game and have that full level of concentration, it might have been more difficult during this period to make headway. So it's kind of been mixed. I mean, obviously I'm far luckier than most because, I can work at home and it hasn't had that huge disruption.
Yeah.
But I think everyone's found it kind of hard going in one way or another. And, we're sort of in quarantine for the last couple of days because my daughter had a cough. She went back to school, got a cough, and so now she's at home and my son's at home and my other daughter's at home. And we were all locked down while the test got posted off. We were lucky because the school had test to post. Otherwise, we couldn't find the nearest test place was 150 miles away or whatever. So
ridiculous.
We posted the test off and we're waiting for that. And hopefully it comes back negative and we can go back to normal. But, it's going to be very stop-start in all kinds of weird ways over the next, year or so, I imagine, at least.
Yeah.
And, the book's out next week and normally I'd be on the road going to bookshops and all that stuff. And obviously that part of the book trade is just on ice at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to be done, in this fashion. So it's just a different way of looking at things. And we've all got to adapt to new ways of working, I guess.
And let's hope then that when book 3's out, we're not having the same conversation where we're still under some sort of lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be nice. Especially, I think, because with the middle book, you feel less worried because in a sense, the engine's running and you don't have to kind of make the impact of getting people onto a first book and you're not kind of signing off with a big explosion, you hope. So if there's any book to come out of this time, then a middle book is probably the one you'd want.
Yeah. It's the Empire Strikes Back book, isn't it? Yeah, the middle.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
Without the spaceships.
More downbeat ending, obviously.
Yeah, and no spaceships here.
No,
Yeah. All right, mate. Nice one. I appreciate your time, honestly. I really do.
No, thanks, man. It's been good to talk. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Now, hopefully, I get to see you at some book event in the future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, hopefully, if such things ever happen again, yeah,
Yeah,
fingers crossed.
exactly. I know. All right, dude. But I know Bath quite well. My family, my wife, sister, and mother live over there. So I may bump into you in Bath at some point, socially distancing, whatever it is.
Yeah. Nice.
All right, dude.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
All
All right.
right. Thanks, man. Good to
All right.
talk to you.
All right, Joe. Nice one, mate. I appreciate it. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye bye. Bye bye.